Christopher Nolan's greatest strength is becoming his biggest weakness. He's one of the only directors whose name alone can sell a blockbuster. But the filmmaking philosophy that made him so successful is starting to create problems that didn't exist 20 years ago. I'm Cameo making an appearance. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To understand, we have to go all the way back to his first feature film. Lots of people have seen Memento. Far fewer have seen Following, a tiny black and white noir thriller Nolan made for only about $6,000. Watching it today feels eerily familiar. It's like looking at the skeleton of every Christopher Nolan movie before the budget, before the spectacle, before Hans Zimmer and IMAX. It's all there. A heist, a crime, characters explaining the rules of a dangerous game.
That's what it's all about. Interrupting someone's life. They'll have to think for the first time in a long time.
Most importantly, a mystery that actively pulls you through the story. Christopher Nolan doesn't simply tell mysteries. He creates enthralling confusion. You're confused, but in exactly the right way. You're constantly asking questions. Who's lying? What's happening? How does this work? And more importantly, how is this possibly going to end? The curiosity is what drives almost every great Christopher Nolan film.
Don't you listen. You take it away and show them what they have.
I've heard Nolan mention many directors who influenced him, but watching his work, I always feel like Christopher Nolan is what would happen if David Fincher and Steven Spielberg made movies together. From Fincher comes the noir DNA. Crime, precision, morally gray, dead cool protagonist, puzzle box storytelling. His early films, Memento and Insomnia, sit in the same dark, precise lineage as Fincher's Seven. If he kept going that direction, he might have ended up making movies with a cult vibe like Fight Club. Instead, he cast a much wider net, the blockbuster net to be precise. He started incorporating some of that Spielberg big cinematic dazzle, spectacle that make movies of any genre feel like an event.
Well, we used to look up in the sky and wonder at our place in the stars. Now we just look down and worry about our place in the dirt.
If Fincher represents dark intrigue, Spielberg creates adventurous wonder with films like E.T. and Indiana Jones. Movies like Batman Begins and Inception intrigue the whole family, and they have mass appeal. And by marrying these styles of intrigue and spectacle, he gave the world intellectual blockbusters. Batman Begins was a turning point. Instead of making audiences choose between thoughtful filmmaking and popcorn entertainment, Nolan merged the two. The Dark Knight, Inception, The Prestige, and eventually Interstellar all refined this formula. The spectacle wasn't replacing the puzzle. It was making the puzzle feel enormous. And the puzzle was making the spectacle feel justified. Nolan himself basically told us how his films work. He just did it in The Prestige instead of an interview.
Every great magic trick consists of 3 acts. The first act is called the pledge. The magician shows you something ordinary, but of course, it probably isn't. The second act is called the turn.
He's obsessed with discovering your method.
The magician makes this ordinary something do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. That's why there's a third act called the prestige. This is the part with the twists and turns, where lives hang in the balance.
Julie, come on!
And you see something shocking you've never seen before.
The movie is about magic tricks, but it's really about why audiences love them. You want to know the secret. The trick isn't satisfying because you understand it. It's satisfying because you desperately want to understand it. That's exactly how Christopher Nolan structures his films. Every scene creates another question. Every answer creates another mystery. His movies aren't propelled by action. They're propelled by curiosity. And that's where I think his greatest strength creates a weakness. Once the mystery is gone, sometimes the movie loses a large portion of its power.
How can you read that again?
It's good.
Yeah, but you've read it like 1,000 times.
I enjoy it.
I I always thought the pleasure of a book was in wanting to know what happens next.
Now, I know many people rewatch Nolan films endlessly and get something new every time.
For me, they're different. Watching a Christopher Nolan film feels like visiting an incredible theme park. During the experience, I'm completely absorbed. Afterwards, I can't stop thinking about it. For about a week, I think I may have just witnessed the greatest movie ever. But a year later, when somebody asks if I want to watch it again, I'll think about it and say, nah, because I already know the trick.
The curiosity that swept me through the first viewing isn't there anymore. And disclaimer, I don't think that's a problem. If they're designed like a magic trick, they're intentionally made to create an experience the first time. Now, there is an outlier to this rule. Ironically, the exception is Interstellar. The first time I watched it, I was more impressed by the spectacle than the ending. I expected a bigger finish, something more intellectually shocking. The second time, once I stopped waiting for a different ending, I found myself appreciating everything else. The emotional story became stronger. The relationships became richer. Every viewing made the movie better instead of simply explaining the mystery. Interstellar is the Christopher Nolan movie that survives after the puzzle disappears.
Which brings us to Tenet. In this film, the mystery becomes the destination instead of the vehicle to get you there.
Instead of asking questions because I cared about the people, I was asking questions just to understand the rules. For the first time, Nolan's love of complexity started to feel like it was competing with the story instead of serving it. After Tenet, the seams were starting to show, and audiences started asking whether he had become too fascinated with his own formula. Christopher Nolan's greatest strength has always been making audiences curious, but his recent films sometimes mistake confusion for curiosity, and those aren't the same thing.
Curiosity invites you into the story. Confusion can keep you outside of it. So what changed? For the first half of his career, Nolan relied heavily on his brother, Jonathan Nolan, to co-write his most emotionally grounded, tightly structured scripts. It would seem as though Jonathan acted as the editorial anchor, grounding Christopher's most high-concept puzzle box films. The ultimate irony of Nolan's career is that the structural indulgence of Tenet didn't diminish his power, it solidified it by proving his name could draw hundreds of millions of people to the theaters during the pandemic. He earned absolute unchecked autonomy from Universal Pictures. He won ultimate freedom after delivering his most mechanically flawed film. Writing a film completely from scratch is a massive task for anyone, but Nolan no longer had his co-writer. Instead, his new co-writer was history. He's migrated into adapting stories. But when Nolan takes a Spielberg-level human drama like the evacuation of Dunkirk or the immense psychological guilt of Oppenheimer and forces it into a mechanical, time-bending puzzle box, the structure stops serving the story. It starts competing with it. The puzzle is no longer a natural fit. It's a habit he can't seem to shake. Tenet was an incredibly complex world for one person to build, but with Dunkirk and Oppenheimer, the narrative guardrails were already built in for him, leading to his most critically acclaimed solo work.
Despite them being an enormous success, they still show Nolan's instinct to withhold information and manipulate perspective in order to create suspense. Sometimes I find myself feeling that a more straightforward version would actually be more emotionally effective and durable.
Perhaps that's why he was open to adapting the Odyssey. It's already extremely complex. So let's find out if Nolan is able to restrain himself from withholding information and mixing up an already jam-packed timeline.
Christopher Nolan has always manipulated time. He's always hidden information. He's always built elaborate narrative puzzles. Those qualities made him unique. They made him famous. But when every movie has to become a bigger puzzle than the last, eventually the puzzle itself risks becoming the point. What happens when you're not just a storyteller, you're a puzzle teller? What happens when you take a story that's interesting in its own right and you force it into a puzzle? With Christopher Nolan, we're finding that answer in real time.